Welcome to the DevReady podcast, where we're helping non-techs build great tech. Today, joined by George, and this is a great conversation around how we might start up a product quite effectively with low-code, no-code tools. We'll dig into a little bit of that. George is the co-founder of Mayfly Ventures, supporting early-stage founders that are looking to solve really niche problems and really bring domain expertise to a solution and get some support in terms of how you might bring that to a product market fit. George has some significant background in capital raising in that space and VC worlds, as well as his own startups. George, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, great to join you, Andrew. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, mate. Tell me a bit about you. So everyone always likes to dig in a little bit more, your background, how you came into Mayfly. Tell us a bit about you.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I've had a really varied and wonderful kind of background when it comes to my career. Um, I guess kind of the relevant parts are studied a very generalist kind of degree back in university. I was fortunate enough to be involved in a couple of startups. After that, I had my own startup where I raised some capital. Um, you know, didn't make it to a unicorn status, unfortunately. That failed pretty early on. But that was a great experience for me to just get embedded within the startup ecosystem and find my passion for, bringing incredible ideas to life and solving heaps of challenges along the way. So yeah, since then I've worked at a couple of startups. At some point I realized that, startups don't always pay very well and that you do need a bit
Can be
of job
challenging to
security.
get a pay if you're looking for job security. Not the place to be, are
That's exactly
they?
right. So yeah, at that time I had a girlfriend who said, come on, you got to get a bit more serious. So I joined the consulting world and corporate. So I did that for a couple of years. Um, but I've always had little side hustles. While I've been doing that, I run an e-commerce business where we retailed and manufactured high-end gaming equipment, game state. Um, and then as a result of that, also built a tool to help e-commerce businesses automate inventory management and stock controls. So um, yeah,
That's
did that
Pricely, yeah.
for
That's still is
yeah,
that still
that was
running?
Pricely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that was a classic example of building without a great deal of validation. Just because you've got a particular need doesn't mean that other
The
people
world has one.
have that need and are necessarily willing to pay for it. So, Pricely was a good, all the startup ventures that I worked on have been great learning opportunities, but the ones that have failed spectacularly are the ones that give you the most amount of learning, I would say.
Let's dig
Um,
into those because it's all learning, right? We're here on a different
yeah.
podcast to learn. Let's dig into, is it Pricely you want to talk about, or is there something in particular that comes to mind that you can take some learning from? Where would you like to go with that? Because I'd love to dig in a little bit.
I've had a number of businesses
Yeah.
over my sort of, 10 years or so that have been, you know, an adult, I guess. And a lot of it was trying to do something different, build something cool, and seeing if people are going to come. And I think during that time, I could boil down the lessons into kind of three parts. For every successful business, you need to identify a problem that users are willing to pay money for. I think, you know, I've had businesses where uh, people might have a problem, but the problem wasn't enough of a burning platform for them to pay for it. Alternatively, I've had people who are willing to pay for a solution to a problem that they have, but not enough people have that same problem. So what I learned
Okay.
is
It's
going
too
after
niche then sometimes. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So there's a sweet spot where the problem has to be niche enough, but it needs to be experienced by a critical mass of users, where you've got some level of commercial opportunity there.
Got it.
I think that's the first thing. The second thing is uh, every business boils down to a funnel. If you don't have a funnel, you don't have a business. So identifying what is that path to market for your business and understanding which channels you can go after to get those customers, those initial customers, and um, have a path towards generating revenue is probably one of the most fundamentally important things that you could do in a business. I've had businesses where it's been a technically great product, and I know there are people
Yeah,
who
technically great doesn't mean much. It doesn't.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't mean much at all.
Yeah.
Likewise,
Well,
the product
but
was
the
great.
product's not. Look, I say this often. Yeah,
Yeah,
product's great, but product's not strategy. Yeah, it's not a business strategy.
yeah,
It's a piece to delivery. It's not
correct.
the end that's going to drive revenue for the business.
Yeah, I would say even if you figured out the business model and you've got some level of
Yep.
kind of understanding that there's a problem that's niche enough and exists in enough of a critical mass, you still have the challenge of can you get to those customers, right? And that's a
And the
critical
cost to
element
market
as
to
well.
those can be
Exactly.
significant
Yeah.
sometimes, right? And if maybe
Yeah.
it's too much to market, they're only going to pay $10 a month or something, and you've got to spend $200 to get a customer. There's no return there because
Yeah,
that can be
exactly.
found
So
too. I've seen that in startup.
correct. That was the second thing. And then the third thing is um, it's all about execution and delivery, right? The first two things really don't count unless you can set yourself clear goals and benchmarks and milestones that you can then systematically start actioning through. And here, some people either have it or they don't. And startups tend to thrive when you've got a team orientated towards a common goal with very tangible steps towards achieving those goals and a willingness and drive to actually take those steps.
In terms of execution, it's number one of all of the above. I find that there's always a way to get to an outcome. And if you're willing to spend enough time in a space, you will find a solution for a market, provided you can commit to that, right? So I've been in business 16 years, and that business has evolved probably 10 times inside of it. There's been spin out products out of it. There's been a product we spun into the pharmacy sector that's it'll be a success in its own right. There's been a couple of startups that we've helped scale and scale out. It's been quite fascinating. But if you're willing to play with the models and angles and change your customers and evolve
Yeah.
them, I think any business can be successful. But
Yeah.
you need to have the capital and time to be able to do that too. So there's a bit of balance there.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. I think um, product market fit is a
Yeah,
function of how many cycles of iterations you can sustain. And these
correct.
days, a lot of startups are not measuring their burn rate in terms of how much runway they have, but they're doing it in terms of how many product iterations they can get out of it. And yeah, that's such a great point because you're right. Most businesses, given enough time and resources, can probably find
Yeah.
some level of
Find an
product
angle.
market
Yeah,
fit,
correct.
given that you can iterate your business model enough times to do more of
Yes.
what works and less of what doesn't. I think product market fit simply boils down to that. It is do more of what works and less of what doesn't. But it's the nuance in that hamster wheel that's so important because if you're on that wheel, you know 20, 30, 40 iterations out and you're still not really getting closer to a goal, then maybe you're not feeding in the right data and proof points to help short circuit those iteration cycles.
I agree with that. And I think sometimes people can get stuck in what they've always done, and that becomes a problem too. So if we get stuck in what we've always done, then we get complacency in that we don't try new things. I think a founder needs to be even a startup total needs to be very open to change. And if they're not, then they're probably in the wrong place. Because change can be who you're talking to, your target market, your channel can change, pricing model can change, your core product can change, everything can change. So if you're open to change, you will learn and evolve and iterate. If you're not, you'll be stuck for 2 years, you'll burn out and you're done. So
Yeah.
that's what I've seen success is in startup. be willing to change, evolve, pivot quickly. Sometimes they pivot too quickly. You've got to test enough. I think some people pivot too quickly. There's no perfect answer though, right?
Mm.
But I've seen people pivot too fast, and then someone else comes in, does what they did before, but just spends the time and gets it right, and then they're winning, and the other guys have pivoted 3 times and got nothing. So
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes you got to stay the fat, but you don't know what the right answer is. You have to trust your gut a little bit too.
Yeah, look, I think the quality that you're describing there is endurance, you know.
Yeah,
Founders, good
resilience,
founders.
endurance. I
Yeah,
think resilience is probably more
yeah,
because you're going to get smacked around quite a bit. So if you're resilient in that space, you can last a longer journey.
yeah, 100%.
Let's jump into Mayfly because obviously a lot of it's joined into what you're doing now, and you went and built Mayfly for a reason. But tell me a little about why. Why did you jump into Mayfly? What did you see? What was the opportunity?
I got a little bit of a taste in the VC scene when, you know, in my previous role as head of product at another venture studio that was primarily a fund with a bit of a venture studio arm
Okay.
to it.
Yep.
And some of my learnings from that was, you know, there's an absolute need for capital when it comes to like launching disruptive ideas, but
Yes.
there's also a big group of founders who might have the next unicorn idea startup, but they might never get there because of all of the pitfalls that the early stage startup journey is full of.
Can I ask you a
Yeah.
question? What's the fascination with the unicorn startup?
I honestly, I don't know.
Chances of yeah, better chances of probably winning that lotto. What's the
Yeah,
fascination where that's a reality if you look at the numbers, right? So why do
yeah,
people get so obsessed with I want to be the next unicorn? Create a
yeah,
bloody good business, and you'll have a lifetime of just enjoyment from that too. So I think
yeah.
got to get back
I,
to
I,
business
I agree with
basics
you.
in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do, you know, I 100% agree. Like with Mayfly, we're like, you know, our definition of scale is fundamentally different to how VCs define scale. Um, Now, there is a lot of ingrained structural reasons why people shoot for those unicorns, and that's
Yeah.
purely a system of how funds are set up and the returns that LPs expect. And
Yep.
you do need 100xer in order to kind of make your fund value back, and you know that is essentially the business model that has been set up. Now, as capital gets more and more expensive, people are thinking more about the risk reward trade-off, and you know our hypothesis is that boring businesses are great businesses. They might never be the unicorn scale businesses, but they generate tremendous amount of economic and social value, and that still represents a outsized risk return ratio than you know some of your more traditional small business, typical small business kind of types. Yeah,
How
so
do
I do
you
think there's,
define?
there's a
Yeah.
middle point, right? Yeah.
I think yeah, the model is interesting. The whole VC model drives that. If you're going to go play the VC game, that's what you're striving for because you have to. There's no if buts maybes like you said, so they need to
Yeah,
get exponential growth. Otherwise, there's no chance
yeah.
of VC
I
fund
mean,
succeeding. So
we've taken a bit of a different approach to that. For us, you know, we're essentially trying to arbitrage the risk reward trade-off there. Um,
okay,
in
talk to
terms
me
of
about how. Yeah, how are
yeah,
you doing that?
on the risk side, there is a reason why we do so much. You know, we predominantly focus on the validation piece from doing early stage validations
Yep.
on the actual concept to doing validation on the MVP and the product, right? So we're looking to do that in the most cost effective and time efficient manner possible. So that inherently skews the amount of capital that you need to actually validate, hey, there's a commercial opportunity here, and the business can generate revenue and has a path towards sustainability. Then the other aspect is we actively take interest and interventions in maximizing the chances of our startup succeeding, which is why we're very hands-on as an organization. We care about the little things that most VCs or other type of service providers might not necessarily have a focus on. Everything from setting up introductions to helping you create or pitch opportunities with partners that we have contacts with. It just helps create momentum in the very early stages of a startup, and that's part of how we can skew that risk scale more in our favor. In terms of reward, we're just more realistic about our expectation. We don't really anticipating we're not anticipating every startup that we work with become a unicorn. We think that if you focus on really niche, well-defined problem sets with well-defined customer bases, have deep domain expertise and understanding in that space, and have access to the customers who would pay for those solutions, you can build a great sustainable business out of that. So, we're not like we're not expecting those 100x's, and two, we make those expectations very clearly, very clear with the investors that we bring on the journey.
So obviously, without that, there's less risk in the whole piece, right? So for the investor side, it's less risk, less reward. There's a bit of both in that. Yeah. That's like anything, right? If you want to take a risk, go to the casino, throw $100 on black and see how you go. So that's what VC can be like sometimes.
Yeah, I mean,
when
look,
you talk
about taking smart,
yes, of course,
risk, yeah,
yeah.
And VCs know what they're doing, so there is a bit of
some do. A lot don't make money though either. And the whole venture studio model is a much better chance of success when you've got great people around and people who know how to execute and know what to look for and actually more involved. You've a much better chance of success in that sort of environment than here we'll throw you. I've been a part of some businesses that have raised multi-million dollars and seen them burn money because they had no idea how to execute. That's fascinating. Whereas if they were working with people that could execute, probably with a quarter of the money, they could have got a lot further. So sometimes that happens too in the environment because, yes, on paper, this team looks great. They know what they're doing. But the reality is maybe they're non-technical. This is an example, non-technical group, really good caliber of experience in the domain, but didn't know how to execute on the technical side, and the whole business hindered on that. So it became fascinating in how they worked with providers and how they picked providers and the amount of money they got burnt during that period. The first rate was, quite mind-blowing to me as to what could have been done differently. So if you got the right people around you, the execution is priority number one. If you're not executing, then you've got no hope, really. Yeah.
I think what we generally tell startups is figure out your business model first. Like figure out there is something worth investing in, and then go raise external capital. And you find you raise on better terms, and you're able to provide a better experience for the investors that you're bringing on board as well, because they can see that the business has momentum and they're pouring gasoline on a fire that's already burning.
Yeah. But to build the model, we need a product. Yeah. We can't just assume anything. And we need to be testing and we need to be iterating with different user groups, messaging, marketing, funnel. You talked about funnel earlier. And then the model only comes when you understand who you're talking to, how you communicate, because that will shift and evolve. But then it becomes, how does the founder fund it, right? So I find there's some interesting dynamics in this space where you might have a business that spins out a new product or a stream. They want to scale, do something different. They can probably part fund some stuff that gives them a bit more leverage to do this. But if you're John sitting in a corporate job and you're looking to exit, you've got, I don't know, you might have max 6-12 months, you've got kids at home. How do you really fund that early stage testing Because the reality is you have to. Most investors aren't investing in this pre-seed, no business model these days, especially in
Yeah.
Australia where we're sitting today.
You mean raising on a hope and a
Yeah.
dream?
Yeah, raising on a PowerPoint is not really
Yeah,
happening
yeah.
right now. Yeah.
Look, I mean, there's a bit of a process to go towards this, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I could boil that down into being clear about saying what you're going to do and then doing what you said you were going to do. And if you can create this virtual cycle where you demonstrate that over and over again, that's what that's when you can build a track record. And there are investors, and I would say a big factor of investment decisions comes down to the founder and how they can demonstrate track record and their ability to execute. So yeah, if you can bootstrap at the very early stage, that's great. But then think about what are those critical milestones that you need to hit depending on the resources that you have access to. If you have zero cash, don't be expecting, people to take on all the financial risk while you've just come to the table with a great idea. At least demonstrate some executional capacity. Set up those meetings with potential customers. Get those LOIs.
Yeah,
Get
have
those
100 have 100 conversations.
exactly.
There's things you can do at zero cost, just time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
correct. Yeah, because you see that people come with we run a consulting business. People come with a paper napkin idea, and they go, "Okay, that
yeah,
sounds great. Now, how are we going to execute on this? Oh, we'll go get some investment. Good luck with that."
yeah,
The reality is, yes, you got to prove that there's something there, or drive an angle, or have a customer willing to pay for something, or take some learning, or bring some insight. There needs to be something that really stands the test
yeah,
of, yes, could you actually raise capital on the back of this
yeah.
concept?
I mean, there is a
Yeah.
it is pretty formulaic, and you can figure it out. It just comes down to, as I said, like being clear about you know what you say you're going to do and demonstrate that you can do what you say you're going to do and build, just take it step at a time. And I've seen, you know, founders, they've had the age disadvantage in the sense that they're very, you know, young, very early stage first time founders. They obviously don't have a lot of money. They don't have access to a lot of connections and sort of contacts. And like, frankly, the odds were very much against them, but they were able to just build up this momentum one meeting at a time, one MOU at a time, one contract at a time, to a point where, they've got enough of a track record behind them where an investor is willing to take a chance on them, or a venture studio is willing to take a chance on them, get them to that next milestone that catalyzes some level of growth, and then build on from that.
It's about proving, getting on the road, doing something. It's grinding, right?
Yeah.
And age just doesn't matter. Yeah, I find that sometimes you can be. I find sometimes the older can be very clever from a domain perspective, but have no concept of business acumen at all, or how to go about executing. Whereas sometimes you get these young guys that will just go and try anything.
Yeah.
But it could be anyway. It doesn't, age doesn't matter, and it can go both ways. And sometimes you get the young naive guys that say, "I'm just going to raise money and not do much off the back of a PowerPoint." But everyone's different, and I think it doesn't really matter, provided that you're willing to, like you said, hit some KPIs. What are we trying to achieve here? How do I prove something that's really there? How do I get some users on this thing? Or if it's not that, how do I have a conversation with a client? Let's talk about product market fit and how someone might consider that. So I'm sitting at home right now listening to this podcast, and I'm maybe a domain expert. I like to talk to these people a lot. 34 years old, been in this space for a long time, or I'm a business that's looking to innovate and scale a new product out. I find they're a nice little interesting model to work with as well. Where do we start? It's conversation with customers, but I find sometimes your customers don't have the answers. So you're going to have to present something that's new, have a conversation to them. And then it's just about asking questions in a survey. Sometimes doesn't get you anywhere either. Even presenting a product may not get you to where you want if they're going to buy something or not. Asking the question if they're going to buy something and then getting to pay for it is very different too. What does product market fit mean to you, and how do you go about that in Mayfly?
Yeah. I mean, first off, there is no standard definition of what product market fit is. Um, it's like a black hole where you can't directly observe it, but you can observe its
You can
effects, and
feel it. You can
you can
feel
feel
something.
it. It's
Some
like
movement.
gravity, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
gravity
Yeah.
is probably the right kind of way to
Yeah.
describe it. Um, in terms of how we define it at Mayfly, we've got a definition of product market fit, and we lean on the Sean Ellis score for product market fit, which is if a meaningful proportion of your users would be severely disappointed if your product does not continue to exist the next day, then you've achieved some level of product market fit. Now, there are also kind of those peripheral effects that you need to take into consideration, such as an outsized growth rate. So there's going to be sufficient growth in the business that could cover up for the mistakes that you're going to make along the way. Another
There's going to
thing
be plenty
is,
of them.
correct, yeah. Another thing
Yes.
is having a very clear idea of what the outcomes that you want are, because you can't measure how you're tracking progress unless you've defined what that end goal looks like. So being very clear about, okay, what are those key product metrics that really drive value in the business? Take the example of Instagram as an example. What they've really optimized for is the amount of content that's being posted on the platform. So they make it very easy to post, at least in the early days, create content on the platform. Uber could be another example. It's the amount of rides that are being booked on the platform. So being clear about what those outcomes and those sub outcomes are to get you there, that's going to help you measure your progress towards building a sustainable business. Uh, it isn't an easy thing, but one way to boil it down is, as I said, earlier, it is to do more of what's working and what's less of what's not. But you need to be very clear about what that definition of, working looks like, so you can actually optimize towards that endpoint.
Yeah, it is. And you don't know what it is until you're in it either.
Yeah. Actually, even if you're in it, you still don't know.
It still could be
Like,
blinkered, right? Yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I was on a panel to talk about product market fit, and there was a fantastic founder. Um, he's doing another startup now, but in his previous startup, where he was working as an engineer, they had clearly hit that inflection point of product market fit, and they were going through this exponential growth. But you ask him if at that time he felt like they had hit some level of product market fit, and he was
Who said
like,
no?
"No, because
Yeah.
everything's just breaking. There's more work to do.
Yeah.
There's not enough
Yeah.
money. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it is one of those things where
And it's
it's
like you said, how
difficult.
do you measure it? It's something
It
that
happens. Yeah, it's like I think the best definition of it happens slowly and then all at once. You know.
I think what you just said is quite fascinating because
Yeah.
when you're in a startup, 90% of it's probably not working. But you got to distill down to what the 10% is that actually is working, and is that growing? Is it maybe user feedback's growing? Maybe it's the share rate's growing. Maybe it's the referral to another customer's growing. Whatever that is, that gives you that. You need to distill what that piece is that you're going to hang your hat on, because
Correct.
not all of it's going to be working, and it never will be for quite a long
Yeah.
while. And there's always going to be a challenge in any business, let's put it bluntly. So it's never perfect, but at the early stage, most of it's not perfect. And that's why it can be probably a bit overwhelming as to is it really working or isn't it?
Yeah. As I said, a lot of what success in startups come down to is just building momentum, right? So, um, Sam Altman had an interesting talk where he talks about burnout as a function of momentum. When you've got momentum, um, work is energizing. So you kind of compound on the outputs of what you're producing. Whereas when you don't have momentum and you're in a space of stagnation, it really does feel like you're, you know, pushing stuff uphill.
Shit uphill, yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
say.
Okay, we can swear. Okay, good.
That's all right.
Yeah,
Now, in terms of anyone that wants to get in contact with you, Mayfly, this has been a really good chat. I think we could probably talk for a couple of hours, actually.
yeah, I reckon so, yeah.
We'll get you back on some point. Let's grab a coffee at some point too, because we're both in Melbourne. But if anyone wants to connect, learn a bit more about Mayfly and your strategy, who are you looking for? I think you mentioned earlier offline, it was
Yeah,
niche, particularly was what you're going after, and you mentioned a few bit of the conversation, some
yeah,
domain expertise.
for sure.
Who do you want to bring into the ecosystem?
Yeah. So we're looking for founders who are solving very niche problems in industry. So founders who have deep domain expertise, what we call industry insiders. They might have a unique insight into a particular problem that that industry experiences. But more importantly, they know and have access to the customers who might be willing to pay for that solution. Um, so if you're that kind of founder,
It's a difficult one, isn't it? They know
it
and
is
have
it
access to the customers. That's half the battle in business, or more than half, really. Because if you've got a
yeah,
network to
but
sell to, it's much easier.
what we're banking on is if you are that industry insider, you probably have all the right contacts and networks in place to, you know, bring that solution to market. So we want to work with founders who fit that bill, but don't necessarily have a technical background, which is where we come in. But at the same time, can demonstrate that they are an operator and they can deliver. And there's a lot of ways to kind of demonstrate that their past experience and the projects that they've led in their career, or it could even be volunteering activities. It could even be the fact that they've managed to build up the business case to a point where we're having a conversation, and they might be coming to that conversation armed with a couple of letters of intent or some pre-sales or, you know, some customer surveys and engagement and a sales deck, hopefully. And those are our kind of dream founders. So yeah,
That's
if you're
early
that kind
still,
of
though,
founder,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
it's early, but
yeah,
they're proving something, right? So they don't
correct.
have
Yeah,
product, for example.
that's exactly.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay. There's plenty, and I think for everyone listening to the DevReady podcast, we're all about helping non-techs build great tech. I feel there's a lot of synergy in the philosophy, and Mayfly, if anyone's listening, could make a lot of sense to very early stage founders, but hit the bill on some domain expertise, some path to market, maybe done some groundwork in terms of products, some industry insights that they can bring to the table. So, Gio, really good to connect today. I'll get you on again. I think there's plenty to talk
yeah.
about.
So we can grab a coffee.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do it. Let's organise it, man. Thanks for coming on the DevReady podcast today. Really appreciate your time, and let's stay in contact.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to chat, mate. Okay, I'll catch you. Bye.